At the birthday dinner my children threw for me, they smiled, poured wine and toasted like I was minutes away from signing my life away. But when the lights cut out and the screen dropped, I showed them a truth they never saw coming, betrayal captured on camera frame by frame. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now so you never miss another twist-filled story like this one. My name is Helena Laurent. I'm 70 years old, and I live alone in a house that once echoed with laughter and ticking clocks. Now it mostly echoes with silence. The Laurent estate sits on a rise just outside the sleepy town of Aurora, Minnesota, a sprawling Victorian mansion with ivy-kissed balconies and stained glass windows that trap the sunlight like colored secrets. The townspeople call it the Clock House. Some think it's haunted. Others think I'm mad. Neither are completely wrong. Every room holds a timepiece, grandfather clocks with dragon-carved spines, delicate mantel clocks from Bavaria, pocket watches behind glass domes, still gleaming with polished brass. Over the fireplace in the library hangs my husband's greatest creation, the Phoenix, a golden wall clock shaped like a bird rising from flames, its pendulum swinging like a heart that refuses to quit. I dust them all myself. I wind them on Sundays. I set them by hand, refusing to let time drift. It's not just habit, it's ritual, like breathing, like remembering. Julien, my husband, passed away 9 years ago on a snowy February morning, holding my hand and whispering apologies for leaving me behind. He died the way he lived, quiet, precise, with a heart that gave until it simply couldn't anymore. Julien Laurent wasn't just my husband. He was a master horologist, a poet of precision. People flew in from Tokyo, from Zurich, just to watch him disassemble a watch piece by piece, and then rebuild it as if he were rewinding fate. He believed time was art, that a tick was a brushstroke and a talk was a breath. We met when I was 22 at an antique fair in Geneva. I was studying cultural anthropology, then fascinated with rituals and heirlooms, the things people hold on to when they lose everything else. I wandered into his booth because of a broken French naval chronometer. I left with a heart pounding like a new movement. He asked me to dinner that night. He proposed within a month. He told me he was building a clock that would only chime once on the day he died. And it did. It sits in the East Hall now, untouched, silent. I don't go near it. Life since Julien has been rhythmic, if not full. There are still duties, rituals, patterns to uphold. I keep his workshop exactly as he left it. I maintain his collection, now our collection, I suppose, making sure each piece is catalogued and oiled. The museums keep calling, offering to exhibit his work. I keep saying no. The house feels like a museum already. No need to move it. Victor and Evelyn, our children, don't understand this. Not really. Victor calls every second Tuesday, usually with a forced cheerfulness in his voice and some new business venture that's about to explode. He failed out of 2 startups in his 30s and burned through an inheritance check before he hit 40. Now he's dabbling in real estate, or maybe cryptocurrency, I stopped asking. His calls always end the same way, with a heavy sigh and a, "But I'm trying, Mom. You know I'm trying, right?" I nod, even though he can't see it, because saying yes makes the guilt easier for him to bear and for me to swallow. Evelyn is complicated. She teaches art at a charter school near Duluth, lives in a small apartment with a cat named Diego, and a quiet sort of bitterness she inherited from me. She's been divorced for 6 years now and still speaks of her ex-husband as if he were a thesis she never finished. She visits on holidays, brings hand-painted scarves and soy candles, always wrapped too carefully like a gift is a form of apology. Neither of them knows how to exist in this house anymore. The last time they both came home at once, Julien's memorial, they left after one night citing allergies and bad cell service. I know better. This house breathes ghosts, not the scary kind, the kind that make you look inward, the kind that remember what you forgot. The town of Aurora doesn't change much. The bakery still sells apricot turnovers every Wednesday. The post office still runs 10 minutes late. The same old men still gather outside Main Street Cafe playing checkers and arguing about fishing laws. They all know who I am. They all pretend they don't. That's how small towns are. Sometimes I walk down to the antique store Marion's Treasures and pretend to browse just to hear someone say my name. Sometimes I sit by the lake with my journal sketching timepieces in the margins like I used to when Julienne was sketching beside me. But mostly I stay here in this house with the ticking. There's something about living surrounded by clocks that either drives you mad or keeps you sane. For me, it's both. The ticking keeps the silence from swallowing me whole, but it also reminds me relentlessly of what I've lost, what I've missed, what I can never rewind. There's a photo in the hallway, me and Julienne, our wedding day, standing beneath a blooming magnolia tree. My dress was vintage satin, his tuxedo slightly too big. His arm around my waist, his smile soft, like he already knew something I didn't. I talk to that photo sometimes. Ask him questions. Tell him secrets. Pretend he's still here adjusting the hour hand or polishing a gear. Last week I forgot to wind one of the mantel clocks in the drawing room. Its silence startled me, an absence that screamed. I sat there for 10 minutes staring at its still hands, wondering if that's how Julian felt in his final days. If he too sensed something slipping. Maybe it was just the flu. Or maybe I'm growing old. The doctor says I'm fine. No dementia. Blood pressure's good. Cholesterol's fine. Just a little arthritis in the fingers. Nothing you can't handle, he says. I nod, of course. But I feel it, the soft crumbling. Not of mind. Of connection. I miss the days when the house was loud. When Victor would run up the stairs shouting about monsters in the attic. When Evelyn would paint on the wallpaper and lie about it. When Julian's radio played French jazz in the kitchen while he simmered lamb stew on Sundays. Now even the echoes are quiet. This morning I took out the key to the western cabinet. Inside is Julian's first timepiece, a silver pocket watch he made when he was only 23. It no longer works, but I refuse to fix it. Some things are meant to rest. I held it to my ear. Nothing. Then I closed the cabinet, turned around, and walked into the foyer where the sunlight poured through stained glass and made the hardwood floor look like liquid amber. For a moment I stood still and listened. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It's strange how the loudest sound in a house this size can be the ticking of something so small. I sat in the high-backed chair beneath the library window and opened the leather-bound journal I've kept for decades. Flipping through its pages, I stopped at a sketch Julian once made of a time machine, childlike in its design, whimsical, impossible. In the corner he'd scribbled, "If I could, I'd go back to the day I met you and ask again just to hear you say yes one more time." I closed the book before I could cry. At precisely 900 a.m., the front gate buzzed. I walked slowly to the security monitor and saw a delivery truck parked just outside. Flowers, a box of them. From Victor, for no reason. The card read, "Thinking of you. Let's talk soon." I knew what it meant. The same kind of flowers he sent last spring, 2 weeks before, asking for a small loan to get through a dip. Lavender and peonies. His mother's favorite. I left them in the foyer, didn't bother to trim the stems. I'm not angry, not really, just tired. There's a drawer in my desk labeled "What If?" It holds unsent letters, plans I never followed through on. Pictures of me and the kids at Disney World, all of us smiling through the Florida heat, pretending we were a normal family. There's even a real estate brochure from the South Coast, Naples, Florida. White sands, quiet, warm. Sometimes I take it out and imagine myself there, on a porch with lemonade, teaching kids how to build clocks with scraps, watching the sun dip low without feeling the weight of anything left unsaid. But then I hear the clocks again. Their ticking calls me back, not just to the house, but to the past, to the life that shaped me, the love that built me, the disappointments that aged me. I don't want to run from them, but I no longer want to be defined by them either. It's strange. I've always believed that clocks were witnesses, that every second captured in their hands was a second of life remembered. But lately I've begun to wonder if they're more than that, if they're not just remembering but judging, waiting for me to decide, to stay inside the loop or break free. Because time, unlike love, doesn't forgive. It just moves forward. And maybe, so should I. It was a Wednesday when they showed up. I heard the tires crunching gravel long before I saw their faces. 2 cars. First, a silver SUV with tinted windows pulled through the wrought iron gate, pausing like it needed permission to enter. Then came the second vehicle, smaller, darker Victor's Lexus. Both cars parked side by side, facing the house like challengers. I stood at the top of the stairs. The foyer stretched out behind me, light pouring through the stained glass like blood. For a moment I wondered if I'd forgotten a holiday, a birthday, a funeral. Then I saw their silhouettes emerging from their cars, carrying nothing but purses and tension. Victor stepped out first, hair slicked back, collar open, blazer, creased just enough to look spontaneous. He walked like he was making a pitch, always had. Evelyn followed slower, adjusting her scarf with deliberate elegance. She'd gained weight around the eyes. Whatever exhaustion she carried, she wore it well. They didn't ring the bell. They just opened the door. Mom Victor's voice rang out too cheerful. "Guess who? I'm not blind yet," I called from the banister. They both looked up, plastering their faces with delight. Mom Evelyn practically sang, "You look fantastic." I didn't. I was in an old linen shirt with a tea stain on the hem, hair tied in a loose knot. But they weren't here for fashion critiques. "Look who decided to pay a visit," I said as I descended slowly, letting each step resonate like a drumbeat. Victor met me halfway and kissed my cheek barely. Evelyn gave me a hug that smelled like lavender and felt like a tax form. "We just wanted to check in," she said, eyes scanning the foyer like she was taking inventory. On a random Wednesday morning, I raised a brow. Victor chuckled. "Come on, Mom, we were just in the area." "You live 3 hours away," I said. There was a beat of silence. They exchanged a glance. "Well, we missed you," Victor said. "And Evelyn had a few days off." I said nothing. I led them into the sitting room, offered coffee, which they declined, then settled into my chair by the window. Victor took the couch like he owned it. Evelyn perched on the edge of the armchair, legs crossed tightly. So I said, "What's this about?" They both smiled, and that's how I knew I was in trouble. Evelyn started first, soft voice, careful tone. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time to think about your future, your comfort, your safety." "My safety," I repeated slowly. Victor leaned in. "You're living in this big old house all by yourself. What if something happens? What if you fall and no one finds you? You're both here now," I said. Did I look like I'd fallen? Evelyn exhaled a patient sigh, the kind teachers use when explaining subtraction to slow children. "Mom, we're not saying you're incapable, just that maybe it's time to make life easier." Victor pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "We found this amazing place, Mom. It's called Willow Haven. It's not one of those depressing facilities, I promise. It's for active, independent seniors. Pool, garden, on-site medical staff, art classes. It's practically a resort." "And I'm the guest of honor?" I asked dry. They didn't laugh. "You'd have people around you," Evelyn added. "You wouldn't be isolated out here." "I like being out here." "It's not healthy, Mom. You don't socialize anymore. You're always alone." I looked between them, 2 grown adults suddenly so concerned about my solitude, 2 children who hadn't visited in over a year. "And you'd both feel better if I were warehoused somewhere." Victor frowned. "That's not fair. Neither is this ambush." "It's not an ambush, Mom. We just want what's best for you." I leaned back. That's always what people say before they take something. Evelyn's cheeks colored. "No one's taking anything. We just want you to be safe and happy." Victor nodded. "We could help with the move, help sell the house. You'd be sitting on a fortune, Mom." "That property." "There it is," I interrupted. Silence. The tick of the grandfather clock filled the void. Evelyn shifted. "We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I stood up slowly. My knees popped like old wood. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's the best I can offer." Victor stood too, smoothing his jacket. "Of course, Mom. No pressure." Evelyn touched my arm. "Just think about it, please." They stayed another 30 minutes, pretending to care about the garden, pretending to be interested in the clocks. When they left, I watched their cars pull away from the library window. Their visit left a strange aftertaste, like something left uncovered too long. That evening I poured myself a glass of red wine and went upstairs to clean the study. It had been Julien's once. After he passed, I turned it into a cataloging room where I documented every timepiece labeled archived repaired. The desk was covered in notes, papers from the conservator in Zurich, a broken escapement wheel from a 19th century marine chronometer. I moved to the right cabinet where the Patek Philippe's were stored. When I reached for a cloth, I knocked over a velvet-lined box. It hit the floor with a light thunk and popped open. Inside wasn't a watch. It was a camera, a tiny black square with a blinking blue light so faint it was barely noticeable. I stared at it stunned. I picked it up, turned it over. No brand, no labels, just sleek matte plastic and a lens the size of a pinhead. At first, I thought maybe one of Julien's old gadgets he'd experimented with hidden mechanisms once. Even built a clock with a concealed recorder. But this was modern, new, digital. My hands began to sweat. Who would put this here? And when I looked around the room, suddenly every shelf felt foreign, every shadow suspicious. I stood in the middle of the study holding that little piece of plastic and felt my stomach twist. I knew who had planted it. Victor or Evelyn or both. There was no other explanation. No one else had been in this house recently. No one else had access to this room. They'd been alone here while I made tea. Maybe longer. Maybe last year. And they'd placed this here not to monitor the clocks, but to monitor me, a camera in my study. A study where I'd once cried over Julien's death, where I'd once scribbled down my funeral arrangements, where I kept journals, lists, thoughts. My sanctuary. Violated. I sat down hard in Julien's old chair. The leather sighed under me. My hand was shaking, but my mind was already doing what it had always done in crisis calculating. This wasn't just concern. This wasn't just a misguided visit. This was strategy. They were trying to build a case, trying to prove I was unstable, unfit, maybe even unwell, trying to move me out of my own house. And if they were willing to plant a camera, what else were they willing to do? For the first time in a long while, I felt something sharp rise inside me. Not fear. Resolve. The ticking of the clocks grew louder around me like a chorus, like a countdown. They wanted me gone, but I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning I woke before the sun. Not because of a dream or the ticking or even the stiffness in my hips. I woke because I couldn't rest knowing that a piece of plastic no larger than a walnut had invaded the last place I truly called mine. The camera lay on the desk where I'd left it the night before, still silent. Still blinking like it had nothing to apologize for. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened my drawer and retrieved a small screwdriver. One of Julien's. I unscrewed the back of the device, hands steady, despite the bile in my throat. Inside a micro SD card. I slipped it out, held it up to the light, then placed it in the desk drawer without a word. I wasn't ready to watch it, not yet, not alone. Instead, I stood up and looked around the study. I mean, really looked. How many other eyes were watching? I scanned the bookshelves first, ran my hands along the spines, moved the old encyclopedias one by one, checking behind them. Nothing. I shifted picture frames, lifted paperweights, opened antique tins. I tapped the underside of the desk, ran my fingers under the lip of the drawer. Clean. It wasn't until I reached for Julien's Swiss-made metronome resting on the mantelpiece above the fireplace that I felt it. A tiny click beneath the base. I turned it over and spotted a thin slit along the wooden edge, barely noticeable. I took the screwdriver again, wedged it in gently, and popped the bottom panel loose. There it was. Another camera, this one older, bulkier, maybe 6 months installed, maybe more. My mouth went dry. Julien had built this mantelpiece himself, installed every beam with precision. He believed in craftsmanship. And now his work had been hollowed out to spy on me. I left the study and began sweeping the house room by room, not frantically but methodically as Julien would have done. In the dining room I found a listening device tucked behind the baseboard heater where the wood had warped just enough to be pried back. In the parlor, another behind the curtain rod, clever placed near the corner where I often sat to write. In the kitchen, nothing. The laundry room clear. But in the hallway upstairs, just above the grandfather clock that had belonged to Julien's grandmother, I found something that made my hands tremble. a thin metal tube attached to the inside of the clock case, its wire snaked behind the chimes. It wasn't just about hearing me now. It was about recording everything. I took the recorder apart with a cool, surgical calm. By the time I made it back to the library, I'd gathered 4 devices, 2 cameras, 2 microphones, 4 betrayals. I laid them out on the dining table like artifacts. Then I sat down and listened. The house was too quiet. Not the usual comforting kind of quiet, but a hush that pressed against the walls like a held breath. I kept waiting for something to move behind me, for a voice to crackle from one of the devices, but nothing happened. So I poured myself a cup of tea, too hot, too bitter, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Later that afternoon, the front gate clicked again. This time only Victor's car rolled in. No Evelyn. I met him at the door. "Just thought I'd drop by," he said, holding up a brown paper bag. Bagels, still warm. I stepped aside without speaking. He followed me into the kitchen like he used to when he was 12 and trying to confess something without saying it. We sat at the kitchen island. He offered me a cinnamon raisin one. I declined. He ate half of a poppy seed before speaking. "So listen, about yesterday." I tilted my head. "We didn't mean to pressure you. Evie and I, we were just thinking ahead. To a time when I'm no longer myself," I said. He blinked, then laughed. "Wow, that's dark. Isn't it what you're planning for?" He put the bagel down. "Come on, Mom, don't twist this." I twisted nothing. I just watched his eyes, the way they flicked toward the hallway, toward the study. "You've been talking to Evelyn again?" I asked. He nodded. "She's just worried. We both are. She used to worry about me falling down the stairs. Now it's about my mind slipping." He didn't answer. "And you?" I pressed. "I want you to be okay," he said. "That's all." I leaned forward slowly. "Victor, why are there cameras in my house?" He froze. I watched his face morph confusion, guilt, panic. "What? You heard me." "Cameras," he repeated. "What are you talking about?" I stood and walked to the dining room, picked up one of the tiny black devices and carried it back like a trophy. "I'm talking about this." He paled. His mouth opened closed. That's not yours, Evelyn's. A friend of a friend's. How deep are you willing to go, Victor?" He stood up. "Mom, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down." He raised both hands. Okay. Maybe Evie thought it was helpful, just to make sure you were okay when we couldn't reach you. You didn't install a baby monitor, Victor. You planted surveillance." He didn't speak, just sat back down slowly. "You're taking this the wrong way." "Then help me understand the right way." But he had nothing, just the shaking of his hands and a hollow look in his eyes. He left shortly after without finishing the bagel. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls instead, bare feet against cold wood, passing by generations of timepieces that refused to lie. They ticked on, unbothered, unshaken. I passed by the grandfather clock again, paused. Then I turned on my heel and went back to the study. I needed to know more. I needed confirmation. I opened Julian's old phonograph cabinet, where I kept a handheld recorder, one of the few digital things I trusted. I loaded a fresh card, turned the device on, and made my way to the sitting room, and waited. 2 days later, Evelyn came. She let herself in something she never used to do. She looked around the foyer like she was measuring the walls for drapes. "I brought you some scones," she said, holding up a paper bag with a logo from a bakery 2 towns over. "Lemon poppy." I nodded, led her into the sitting room. We exchanged pleasantries. She told me about Diego the cat, about her students, about a new art exhibit she wanted to see in the city. Then she paused. "You spoke to Victor?" she asked. I didn't answer. She took a breath. "Mom, we're not your enemies. We just want what's right." "For you?" I asked. "For you," she replied too quickly. I tilted my head. "How's your friend Rodriguez?" That made her blink. "Excuse me, Dr. Rodriguez, your friend, the one who specializes in early-stage dementia assessments." Her cheeks went pale. How do you?" "I hear more than you think." She looked like a child caught stealing. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "We weren't going to do anything drastic. Just gather evidence," I said. "Just build a case." Her lips trembled. "Only if it came to that. Only if you refused to listen." I looked her straight in the eye. "I have listened, Evelyn, and now I'm watching." She didn't stay long, claimed she had a meeting, forgot the scones. When the door shut behind her, I sat on the velvet couch and pulled out the recorder. It had captured everything, every word, every lie wrapped in concern, and one phrase stood out above the rest. a phrase Evelyn had whispered into her phone when she thought I'd gone upstairs to rest. If she starts slipping soon, this'll go a lot faster. That night I copied the file, labeled it Evelyn's sitting room wealth, filed it away, because the war had begun, and I intended to remember every second of it. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe, the kind that doesn't wrap you in peace, but instead presses against your ribs like something waiting to explode. That was the kind of silence that filled the Laurent estate now. For 2 nights I slept with the hallway light on. Not out of fear, not exactly, but out of instinct. The kind of instinct that says, stay alert, this isn't over. By the 3rd morning I knew what I had to do. I poured black coffee into the same chipped porcelain cup Julianne used to call my thinking mug and walked into the sunroom. The light came in long and gold through the glass ceiling. I could see the frost melting off the ivy. Somewhere a blue jay rattled its call. The house was calm. The clocks kept time. But inside me something had clicked. Not like a gear, no like a trigger. I took out my old Rolodex. Yes, I still kept one. Tucked behind the section labeled L was a card I hadn't touched in 15 years. Margaret L. Hanley Esquire. Estate and Elder Law. She was Julianne's legal advisor before his passing, the one who helped us write our wills when we still believed our children would inherit our love before our assets. I picked up the phone and dialed. She answered on the 2nd ring, Hanley Law. Margaret, I said, it's Helena Laurent. A pause. Helena. My God, it's been, 15 years? Closer to 20. I'm calling because I need to make changes. Serious ones. Another pause. Then her voice softened but sharpened too. You want to come in? Or shall I come to you? Here, and I need confidentiality. Of course, she said, tomorrow morning. I hesitated. No, today, as soon as possible. By 2 o'clock, Margaret Hanley sat in my library wearing a gray pantsuit and the same horn-rimmed glasses I remembered. Her hair was shorter now, steel gray and unapologetic. She still carried the leather folio that had once held the Laurent family trust. I assume this isn't a social call, she said, setting her briefcase down with a soft thud. No, I said. And it isn't about forgiveness either. She didn't ask what that meant, just opened her folder. I handed her a manila envelope filled with papers, copies of the surveillance devices, a transcription of the conversation I'd recorded the names Evelyn and Victor had carelessly dropped Rodriguez. Jeff. She read through everything in silence, her brow tightening with each page. When she finished, she closed the folder slowly. You're being watched, gaslighted, and possibly pre-targeted for legal guardianship. She looked up. You're smart to act quickly. I want to rewrite everything I said. My will, my power of attorney, the house, the collection. She blinked. All of it, all of it. And so we began. For hours we sat in the heavy silence of my husband's library and dismantled the future my children thought they owned. First, the clocks. I want to transfer ownership of the Laurent Horology collection to the National Museum of Timecraft in Philadelphia, I told her. Effective immediately. They've asked for years. They'll preserve it, share it. Unlike my children, they understand what it means. And the house, Margaret asked. I inhaled. There's someone, I said. A young man. Name's Samuel Monroe. I helped fund his education 20 years ago. He was part of a scholarship program Julian and I set up for underprivileged students. And you trust him? I do. Margaret raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I handed her a second envelope. Inside was Samuel's letter from 2 years ago. A thank you note handwritten in perfect cursive updating me on his life. He'd become a teacher, was restoring his grandparents' farm, mentoring at-risk youth in rural schools. He believes in people the way Julian used to. Margaret nodded slowly. And you'd like to deed the property to him? Not yet. But I want the legal structure ready, with the option to transfer immediately upon my request. No waiting period. No third-party approvals. She wrote it all down. Next, the accounts. I stood and walked to the old safe behind the bookcase, entered the code Julian's birthday, and withdrew a thick red folder. I placed it on the table. These are the investment portfolios. I want 60% liquidated and moved into a charitable trust. Margaret's brows lifted. Charity. Julian's name, I said. A foundation, focused on scholarships for medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I paused, my throat thickening. I want our legacy to matter, Margaret, not rot in the hands of people who see it as a retirement plan. She didn't argue. For the next hour she worked. Pages shuffled, papers were signed, witnesses called discreetly. I used the pen Julian gave me on our 30th anniversary. By the end of it, the Laurent legacy had been rerouted, not destroyed, redeemed. Margaret packed up her files, and before she left, she placed a hand on my wrist. "I don't say this often," she murmured, "but this is courage." "No," I whispered, "this is survival." After she left, I sat alone at the dining table with a pot of tea and a sharp ache behind my ribs. This wasn't victory. This was surgery, cutting away the rot before it killed the tree. But even necessary surgeries leave scars. I sat there staring at nothing until the light began to dim across the floor and the house turned gold. The clocks chimed 6, each one ringing out in its own cadence. None of them were in perfect unison. Julian always said that was part of their charm. The imperfection, the humanity of time. I let their song surround me. Then I stood, walked upstairs, and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a photograph, me, Julianne, and 2 children standing in front of this very house. Victor was 10, Evelyn 7. I was holding her hand. Julian had his arm around my shoulders. I studied our faces. We looked like a family. But photographs are dangerous things. They freeze happiness like it was permanent. They make you believe that just because a moment was captured, it was real. I placed the photo back and closed the drawer. No more pretending. The next morning, I found Samuel. He was in a public school database, still teaching social studies in Pine Hill, a town I'd never been to, but felt I somehow already knew. I called during his lunch break. "Hello, is this Mr. Samuel Monroe?" "Yes, speaking." I paused, let my voice find itself. "This is Helena Laurent, from the Laurent Foundation." Silence, then a laugh of disbelief. "Oh my God, Mrs. Laurent." "In the flesh," I said. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, no. I still have the watch you gave me at graduation. It works like magic." I smiled. "Samuel, I need a favor." "Anything. Not now, but soon." I didn't say more. He didn't press. That's how I knew I'd chosen well. After we hung up, I looked out at the frozen garden. The rose bushes were bare, the trellises laced with brittle vines. But beneath all that ice and soil, I knew seeds were waiting for spring, waiting for release, just like me. And for the first time in years, I felt something flicker in my chest. Not grief, not fear, but will. There would be consequences, yes. Reckonings, pain. But I wasn't going to be the one trembling in the corner anymore. No, I was the clockmaker's wife, and I was about to reset everything. It started with a phone call that smelled of perfume and pretense. "Hi, Mom," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with orchestrated sweetness. "I have something special planned for you." I stood in the hallway holding the receiver in one hand, my other hand resting on the brass finial of Julian's old grandfather clock. The ticking behind me sounded louder than usual, or maybe my blood was louder. "Oh," I said. "Something special." "Yes," she chirped too fast. Well, I thought, why don't we do something different this year for your birthday?" I made a reservation at Azure. Azure, of course. It was the most extravagant restaurant in the city, all glass walls and white tablecloths perched like a modern temple over Lake Henderson. Julian once said it looked like a jewelry box full of cold fish. We never went. "Your birthday's just a week away," Evelyn went on. "And Victor's coming. He already cleared his calendar." "Is that so?" I said. "Yes, it'll be just us. Intimate, elegant, a little celebration. You deserve it." It sounded rehearsed, memorized, like she'd practiced it in front of the mirror, editing out any tremble of guilt. I waited, and when the silence became too thick, I said, "Of course, that sounds lovely." She exhaled, surprised. "Great, I'll text you the details. 7 p.m. next Saturday. Dress nice, okay? You'll want to look stunning." I hung up without responding and stood in the quiet for a long time. My birthday wasn't until the end of the month. This was early, premature, forced. They weren't celebrating anything. They were setting the stage. That night I opened the drawer where I kept Julian's old spy gear. He had dabbled in it playfully mostly, a phase he went through after restoring a set of W2 field watches. He'd ordered miniature cameras from a collector in Tokyo, disassembled a few, even fit one into a working wristwatch for fun. "You never know when you'll need to catch time lying," he once joked. I smiled at the memory, but it faded quickly. Time wasn't lying now. Time was sharpening its knives. I took the smallest camera I had, a matte black clip-on with audio sync and a motion trigger. It looked like a brooch. I charged it overnight, tested the quality on my laptop, and stitched it into the lining of my coat the next morning. Then I called Margaret Hanley. "Bring another copy of the revised will," I said. "One with a timestamp." She paused, expecting fireworks. "No, I'm expecting poison in a champagne flute." The night of the dinner came with clouds that threatened rain but never delivered. The air hung thick with tension, like even the sky wasn't sure if it should open up. I wore a navy blue velvet jacket, high-collared, classic. Julianne once said it made me look like a woman who knew the secrets of time itself. I pinned an antique brooch to the lapel. Inside the brooch, the camera. I arrived at Azure 15 minutes early. Antonio, the restaurant's owner, greeted me with a warm nod. I had called him the day before requesting a private room. I told him there might be drama. He smiled like a man who'd seen too much opera. "They're already here," he whispered. "Would you like me to bring the menus in 20? "No," I said. "Bring wine, but wait for my signal before the food." He nodded and led me to the elevator. The private dining suite sat on the 3rd floor overlooking the lake. Inside, everything gleamed white tulips on the table, flickering candlelight crystal like cut ice. Victor and Evelyn stood when I entered. "Mom," Evelyn said, reaching to kiss me. "You look wow." Victor smiled tightly. "You've still got it, huh?" I took my seat at the head of the table. "Let's get on with it," I said pleasantly. "I'm starving." They exchanged glances, noted the steel in my voice. Wine was poured. Small talk danced around the edges. They asked about the house, about my arthritis, about the clocks. Evelyn mentioned a gallery in Seattle that was looking for found object sculptures and suggested I donate a few of Dad's pieces. Victor said something about interest rates, then pivoted into a monologue about how hard it was for people his age to own property. Evelyn chimed in about teacher salaries, nodding solemnly. I let them talk. I smiled when they smiled. I swirled the wine, never drinking. Then it happened. Victor cleared his throat and reached into his briefcase. "We didn't want to do this here, but since we're all together," he said, laying a manila folder on the table, "we've prepared some documents for your consideration." Evelyn shifted in her seat, her voice soft. "It's just some paperwork, nothing binding, yet. We just want you to look." I opened the folder. Inside, a petition for voluntary guardianship. A drafted letter of intent to transfer ownership of the Laurent estate. A preliminary agreement for sale to a buyer named Adam Brenton. "Who's Adam?" I asked. Victor blinked. "A colleague. He's looking to invest in historical properties. Really interested in preserving." "Uh-huh," I said, snapping the folder shut. "Tell me, how long have you known Adam?" Victor stammered. 6 months. 7, Evelyn interjected. "We vetted him thoroughly." I looked at both of them. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve tonight?" I asked. "A toast to my surrender." Evelyn flushed. "No one's surrendering, Mom." Victor leaned in. "We just think it's time to move forward. You've got too much on your plate." I reached for my purse, pulled out a small envelope, and slid it across the table. "Open it." Victor did. Inside was a USB drive. "What's this?" "A recording," I said. "Of your last strategy meeting, the one you thought I wouldn't overhear." Evelyn's lips parted. "You recorded us?" "No," I said. "You did. When you planted that mic in my mantelpiece." Silence. Their expressions twisted into something between panic and disbelief. "I've given a copy to my attorney," I continued, "another to a trustee, and one more to someone who doesn't even live in this state." Victor opened his mouth. I held up a hand. "We're not going to pretend tonight," I said. "We're not going to sugarcoat betrayal with wine and lamb chops. You invited me here to corner me, to pressure me, and now you're going to sit here and listen." They were frozen. I leaned forward. "Do you know what it feels like to find a camera inside your husband's metronome?" I asked softly. "To realize your children are watching you like you're already dead." Evelyn's eyes filled. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I snapped. "And don't you dare cry now." Victor was still holding the USB, his hands visibly shaking. "You're our mother," he whispered. "I was," I said. "I gave you every advantage I never had, and somehow you grew up believing that meant I owed you." A long silence passed between us. Then I stood. I reached into my purse again and took out an envelope marked with Samuel's name. Inside a notarized deed, proof of transfer, dated the day before. "I won't be signing your documents tonight," I said. Why? Victor's voice cracked. "Because you think we're monsters." "No," I said, "because I know I'm not a fool." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Thank you for dinner," I said. This was the perfect place to end an illusion. And then I was gone. Back home, I locked the door behind me and exhaled. My chest was tight, but not with regret. I walked into the study and pulled out my phone. Dialed. Samuel answered on the second ring. "It's done," I said. "If anything happens to me, you know what to do." There was a pause, then his voice low, strong. "I won't let them touch a single brick." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I slept, like someone who had finally chosen herself. It was a Thursday morning when I made the call. The kind of morning that feels too still, too intentional. The kind where the silence seems to lean in and ask, "Well, are you ready yet?" I sat at Julian's old writing desk, his magnifying loupe still perched beside a half-disassembled pocket watch I hadn't had the courage to finish. I picked up the receiver and dialed from memory. "Taylor Investigations," a voice answered. "I need to speak to Roy." "Speaking. This is Helena Laurent." A pause. "Then what can I do for you, Mrs. Laurent?" "I need to know if my children are planning to destroy me," I said. Another pause, longer this time. The kind of silence only a man who's heard everything knows how to fill. "Do you have half an hour for me to come by?" he asked. "I have all the time in the world, for now." Roy Taylor arrived with no fanfare. He wore a wool coat older than my son's last job and a leather satchel that had seen more truth than any courtroom. He was in his late 50s, ex-cop eyes, the kind of man who rarely blinked and never repeated a question. I made us coffee. Black, no sugar, he didn't ask, I just knew. We sat across from each other in the sunroom. Light filtered through the tall windows, casting lines across his tired face. "I need you to investigate two people," I said. "Victor Laurent and Evelyn Laurent." He raised a brow but said nothing. "They're my children." That earned me a slow blink. "I want to know everything," I continued. "Their finances, their conversations with lawyers, any legal activity under my name or targeting my assets. I believe they're preparing to challenge my competency or file for control over my estate. I have partial proof. I want confirmation." Roy nodded once. "Paper trail or people trail?" "Both," I said, "but discreet. If they catch wind of this." "They won't," he said. "What's the time frame?" 3 weeks, maybe less." He scribbled notes, then looked up. "Do you have access to their recent communications, emails, phone records?" "Only what I overheard and what they carelessly left behind." "That'll do. I'll start with asset movement and legal filings. Anything you've already got recordings, device serials, timestamps, I'll need copies." I handed him a flash drive, "Everything I have." He pocketed it without looking. "I'll also need to know what they want. Money. Control. Which becomes money." Roy didn't smile, but something in his jaw acknowledged the grim humor of it. "And what do you want, Mrs. Laurent?" "To know the truth, and to prepare for what happens after." The moment Roy left, I changed into a navy wool coat, wrapped my scarf, and drove myself to Fairmont Medical Center, 50 miles away in the next county over. A facility where no one knew me, where no familiar nurses would whisper down hallways or call Evelyn because they thought they were just being helpful. I walked into the admissions office and asked to see a neurologist, a geriatric specialist, and a general physician. I told them I wanted the works, cognitive, physical, psychological. "Do you have any particular symptoms, ma'am?" the nurse at reception asked gently. "Just the suspicion," I said, "that someone else might want to say I do." They scheduled the first exam immediately. I sat in the waiting room surrounded by elderly strangers with real fears, trembling hands, confused eyes, plastic pill organizers clutched like talismans. I watched them quietly, wondering how many of them had someone waiting to take over their lives under the name of love. It took 4 hours. Balance tests, blood work, CT scans, memory games with playing cards and story fragments, a long conversation with a psychologist named Dr. Kent, who wore mismatched socks and smiled like he knew the weight of everyone's silence. "Mrs. Laurent," he said finally, tapping his pen against the chart. "You're sharp, exceptionally so. No early-stage dementia, no cognitive deterioration beyond the expected levels of someone your age. You're physically in good health, emotionally guarded, and mentally intact. Guarded, I asked. He smiled. Your children would have a hell of a time proving otherwise. I left the clinic with the file in hand and a clarity that settled into my bones. Back home, I unlocked the attic. It had been years since I'd climbed those creaking stairs. Julienne's old workbench sat beneath the dust like a sleeping relic. I pulled the cord for the bare bulb overhead and the room filled with a yellow glow. Tools lined the wall, pliers, tweezers, microfiles, watch parts stored in tiny glass jars, leather-bound notebooks filled with sketches of dials and spring tensions. This was the womb of our legacy. I stepped closer and ran my hand along the bench. In a drawer, I found one of our first teaching kits, an old cigar box with a half-completed movement broken, balance wheels, extra screws, and a pair of child-sized safety goggles we once used during school visits. Julienne and I used to teach kids about watchmaking, inner-city kids, rural school kids, kids who thought clocks only existed in phones. And I remembered the look on their faces, the click of discovery when a gear fit just right, when the tick finally came to life. Time wasn't just numbers to them, it was magic. That night I wrote a plan, a full curriculum, 6 weeks beginner level. Introduction to horology. I listed tools, I listed locations, libraries, church basements, community centers, anywhere but here. Because when I left Aurora and I wasn't just going to disappear. I was going to give time back. 2 days later, Roy called. I have something. He didn't elaborate over the phone, just said he'd be there by 4. When he arrived, his face was grim. He didn't take off his coat. They're deeper in than you think, he said. He laid out folders, color-coded, stamped, tagged. Victor has a second mortgage on his condo, he said, which he used to fund a failed cryptocurrency venture. He's also made 3 attempts to get access to your financials through your old banking agent, twice in person, once by phone. He claimed he had power of attorney. He does. For medical emergencies. Signed during my surgery 5 years ago. He's stretching it, Roy said, maybe preparing to contest your capacity. I nodded. And Evelyn. Roy opened the second folder. She's contacted a legal specialist, Jeffrey Coleman. Background in elder care and guardianship law. Unofficially known for helping families acquire financial control under the guise of protecting aging relatives. They've had 3 calls and 1 in-person meeting. I felt my jaw tighten. There's more, he said. Of course there was. Coleman has already drafted a petition, Roy continued. They're waiting for a psychological evaluation to attach. Dr. Rodriguez, I said. Roy nodded. Friend of Evelyn's. No record of any direct consultation with you. But he's prepared a preliminary affidavit based on family testimony. My stomach turned, but my face stayed still. Roy sat back watching me carefully. You okay? No, I said, but I'm ready. He handed me a flash drive. Every document, every call, recorded, time-stamped. I also have statements from 2 of Coleman's former clients, one of whom ended up evicted from her home within 6 months of signing over her assets. God, they want your house, he said. They want your name, and they want your silence. I closed my eyes, then I opened them again. I won't give them any of it, I said. Roy nodded. Then he stood, and for the first time he smiled. You know, he said, most people hire me too late. You're 5 steps ahead. I smiled back faintly. That's what happens when you spend a lifetime keeping time. After he left, I opened the files on my computer, scanned every document, saved backups in 3 separate drives, uploaded another to Samuel encrypted, 1 to Margaret, 1 to a safe deposit box downtown. And then I printed 1 final copy, labeled it in case they try again. That night I returned to the attic. I took out the old cigar box again and added 3 new kits, updated tools, labeled parts, wrote a note for each student I hadn't yet met, and on top of them I placed a little sign, time is not money, time is yours. I went downstairs, set my alarm for 5 a.m., and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hunted. I felt whole. It was raining the morning Roy Taylor returned, hard slicing rain that washed over the glass windows like waves trying to erase the past. I stood in the foyer staring at my reflection in the long mirror, watching the shadows behind my eyes settle into something solid. Roy stepped in water trailing from the hem of his coat hat in hand, expression grim and quiet. He didn't speak until I led him into the study, where the fire crackled low and the clocks ticked in unison, my only army still loyal. He sat without invitation. He looked older today, more worn. "What did you find?" I asked. He set his leather satchel on the table, unzipped it, and pulled out 4 folders, each marked with a name. He placed the first one down. Victor Laurent. I didn't flinch. "He's nearly $200,000 in debt," Roy said. "Credit cards maxed. 3 personal loans from online platforms. He forged your signature 6 months ago to take out a private line of credit for $120,000 attached to your insurance policy." I stared at the folder. I didn't reach for it. "There's a scanned image of your signature," he added. "Sloppy work. Notarized under false pretenses in Oregon." My fingers curled into the armrest. "And the funds, gone. Failed crypto investment, some online gambling, a luxury trip to the Cayman Islands 2 months ago." "Cayman," I said quietly. "He always said he hated the ocean." Roy didn't smile. He set the second folder down. "Helena Laurent. She's been telling people, her co-workers, her neighbors, her attorney, that you've become mentally unstable, that you repeat yourself, forget names, wander rooms at night." "She's never here," I said. "How would she know what I do?" "She doesn't. But she's building a narrative. I have an audio recording of a conversation between her and a woman named Frances, Evelyn's co-teacher. In it she says, and I quote, 'Mom's mind is slipping fast. We'll have to take over before she gives the house away to some stray dog.'" I looked away. Roy continued, "She's also in weekly contact with Jeffrey Coleman. He's the 3rd file." He placed it down. "Jeffrey Coleman, attorney. Specializes in elder asset redirection," Roy said. "His name shows up in 5 prior cases of elderly clients losing their homes to legal guardianship filings led by children. Each time the guardianship was contested and overturned too late. The assets had already been liquidated." My stomach turned. "He works quickly, usually within 6 weeks of first contact. Documents get filed quietly. Courts approve emergency motions. No warning." Roy tapped the folder. "He has a template ready. He just needs one thing to file it." "Let me guess," I said. "A psychiatric evaluation." Roy didn't answer. He simply laid the 4th folder down. "Dr. Martin Rodriguez." I inhaled sharply. "He's an acquaintance of Evelyn's, former colleague from a summer fellowship in Chicago. Hasn't held a board-certified license for private diagnosis in over 3 years. Mostly works under the table now, writing informal evaluations for custody and guardianship filings." Roy slid a printed report across the desk. "He's already drafted a mental health assessment on your behalf. Says you suffer from early-onset vascular dementia with episodes of paranoia and delusional asset fixation." My throat went dry. "He's never met me." Roy nodded. "I know. I confronted him." "You what?" "I told him I was writing a story on elder abuse cases. I didn't mention your name, but I asked about his work with Coleman. He got nervous. Mentioned Evelyn in passing. Denied writing the report until I read a paragraph of it back to him. He looked me in the eyes. He knows he's exposed. But if the guardianship gets filed and you don't contest immediately, the court will assume he's credible." I stood slowly. My legs were trembling, but I didn't sit back down. I walked to the fireplace and placed one hand on the stone mantel, the other on Julienne's old pocket watch that still ticked softly. "I see," I whispered. Roy waited. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I laughed, low at first, then bitter, cold, controlled. "They think they've won," I said. "They think they're the ones moving the pieces." Roy leaned back. "Do you want to go public?" "No," I said. I turned to face him. "I want to set the table." He frowned. "I don't follow." "They wanted to trap me with a dinner party," I said. "This time I'll be the one sending the invitations. And I want them to come hungry." That night I went room by room through the house. I cleaned the floors, polished the brass knobs, dusted the chandeliers until the crystals sparkled like winter stars. I laid out the good china, the silver cutlery with our initials engraved. I had Antonio from Azure send over a custom menu, 5 courses, 3 wines, and a dessert made from black figs and rosemary sugar. I called it the Last Supper in Aurora. Over the next few days, I made silent preparations. I reached out to Margaret Hanley and updated her on every detail. I met Samuel Monroe in person and handed him an envelope. "Don't open this unless something happens to me," I said. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. Then I reached out to a small local film crew, young students from the community college who made documentaries on family law. I offered a quiet sum to record the dinner party as a family history project. No one batted an eye. Everyone wanted to believe the old woman with the clocks, just wanted to remember her golden years. They didn't know I was polishing the blade. 2 nights before the party, I received a letter by courier. It was printed on legal letterhead, folded cleanly, no return address. Inside was a draft of the guardianship petition, filed, prepared, unsigned. But it carried a note, if you sign voluntarily, we can avoid the courts. At the bottom in Evelyn's handwriting, this is for your own good. I folded the letter, placed it in a black envelope, and tucked it beneath Julian's watch in the hallway display case. If they wanted war, they should have remembered who taught them how to count. The storm had passed by morning. The sun shone with the kind of ruthless clarity that only comes after days of lies. And I was no longer just a mother. I was the architect of judgment, and the invitations had already been sent. There was a thunderstorm in the distance that evening. Not above us, but far enough to cast brief flickers of lightning behind the hills like someone warning the earth to brace itself. Inside the Laurent estate, the dining room was bathed in a golden glow. Candles burned low in antique silver holders, their flames steady like guards standing at attention. The table was set with crisp linen crystal glasses and porcelain plates bordered in cobalt blue, the pattern Julianne and I had picked out on our 15th anniversary in Florence. 12 seats, 10 guests. Not one of them knew what was coming. Evelyn walked in first, wearing a burgundy sheath dress and a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. She kissed my cheek like a good daughter would and handed me a small box wrapped in foil paper. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said. Victor followed close behind in a suit that hadn't been tailored and shoes that didn't belong to him. His wife, Tessa, clung to his arm like perfume no one asked for. I greeted them with warmth, polite, controlled, not too much, not yet. They took their seats, casting glances at the young camera crew, positioned discreetly near the corners of the room. "Filming for the family archive," I explained with a smile. "A little keepsake, a tradition I'd like to start." No one objected. After all, who questions a 70-year-old birthday girl? Dinner was served in 4 courses. Mushroom velouté with truffle foam, roasted quail over wild rice, butter lettuce with grapefruit vinaigrette. Each dish elegant, each wine pairing exact. The kind of meal that made people think they were being honored. They laughed, though not too loudly. They clinked glasses, offered half-sincere toasts. I listened more than I spoke, letting them fill the air with their own self-assurance. But even beneath the glimmer, the room felt tight, like breath held for too long. Evelyn checked her phone twice under the table. Victor looked over his shoulder every time someone entered from the hallway. Tessa smiled with her teeth, but none of her photos reached her eyes. Dessert arrived at precisely 8:23 p.m. Black fig tart with rosemary sugar glaze, an ode to Julianne's favorite midnight indulgence. As the plates were set down, I rose slowly. "I want to thank you all for coming." I began, my voice steady but cool. Birthdays used to mean something different to me. They used to be soft, warm reminders of love, of time shared, of family. I looked around the table. Now they feel like thresholds. A few faces shifted. Victor cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe we should save the speeches." "No," I said, "now is perfect." I reached into the pocket of my velvet blazer and pressed a small remote. The room dimmed. The candles stayed lit, but the chandelier above faded, and the hidden projector in the far corner powered on with a gentle whir. Behind me, the far wall, once covered by a painting of Julianne's workshop, slid aside, revealing a retractable screen. Gasps, audible confusion. "What's going on?" Tessa asked, tightening her grip on Victor's arm. I stepped aside and folded my hands. "Let's take a stroll down memory lane, shall we?" The screen flickered, then came to life. Victor's voice recorded on a hidden mic. "If we can get her declared unstable, the whole estate flips automatically. The collection alone could fund 2 startups." A pause. "Evelyn. And the house. Don't forget the house. We sell it. Move her to one of those soft wall facilities. Give it a nice name, Whispering Pines or something." Laughter. Jeff's voice filtered through static. "My guy can draft the petition in 2 days. We just need the psych report." The room was silent. Victor's face turned pale. Evelyn's fingers gripped the edge of the table. I let the silence burn. Scanned image of a notarized loan application. My signature crooked, inaccurate. Next to it, Victor's face captured in a blurry security cam photo at the bank. Overlay text loan amount. $120,000. Secured against Helena Laurent. Life insurance policy status. Default. Gasps rippled down the table. A cousin whispered, "Oh my God." Victor's lips parted. This is fake. You can't prove. "Do you recognize your handwriting, Victor?" I asked, voice cold. He stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous." I raised one hand. He froze. "Sit." He did, like a child. Evelyn in a recorded phone call. "She's halfway gone already. Honestly, if we wait much longer, she might gift the house to a soup kitchen." Voice on the other end. "You sure she won't fight back?" Evelyn laughing. "She still uses a flip phone." Someone at the table choked on their wine. Another reached for their purse as if wanting to disappear into it. Evelyn didn't speak. Her hands were trembling in her lap. I let the moment marinate. A scanned email thread. Tessa's name. Forwarded photos. A man not Victor. Hotel confirmations. Dates that matched weekends Victor said she was visiting her mother. Then images, grainy but clear enough. Victor stared at the screen, then at Tessa. Her face was bloodless. "You were in Denver," he whispered. Tessa said nothing. I turned toward my guests. "In the last 6 months I've been watched, manipulated, lied to, and nearly robbed by my own blood. I've been declared mentally unfit without examination. My signature has been forged, my finances compromised." I looked at Evelyn. "I taught you how to speak." I looked at Victor. "I taught you how to stand tall." I looked at Tessa. "I should have never let you cross the threshold." No one breathed. I smiled, slow, cold, free. "I am not here to beg for understanding. I am not here to plead for mercy." I stepped forward. "I am here to tell you you have lost." The lights came back on. The room looked smaller now. Everyone looked older, weaker, less human. "Enjoy your dessert," I said, and turned my back. I didn't hear their voices behind me, just the ticking, the eternal ticking of Julian's clocks. Time was up. The silence that followed the screening was thick and sour. No one moved. Not a fork clinked, not a glass rose for comfort. The candles sputtered, low shadows dancing across faces too stunned to hide behind politeness anymore. Victor sat stiff in his chair, sweat at his temples, his eyes locked on a place just left of reality. Evelyn's wine glass was still raised, but forgotten fingers tight around the stem, as if it could ground her in a world that had just fallen away. Tessa looked like someone had doused her in ice water shock, frozen on her face, mascara cracking under the weight of betrayal. And I stood at the head of the table, 70 years old, alone, armored in velvet and clarity. This wasn't just dinner anymore. It was Judgment Day. I should have known it would come to this. Tessa snapped suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness like a whip. "You always played the victim. Always hoarded your little empire while the rest of us struggled." Victor flinched. "You never intended to share anything, did you?" She continued, eyes sharp with venom. "You think you're noble, but all this, the cameras, the drama, it's pathetic. We were pretending for your sake, for your money." Her voice echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls. Some guests gasped. Others looked down. Evelyn's face drained of all color. "I was pretending too," I said quietly. "Pretending I hadn't noticed how the people I brought into this world turned my love into leverage." Tessa stood up abruptly. "Victor, let's go. This whole farce." But I raised my hand. "No one's leaving yet." Victor froze again. "I want this to be clear," I said. "Crystal, I'm not throwing you out of my life. That would imply you still had a place in it." I stepped from the head of the table and moved closer, each step deliberate, measured, like a clock winding down to its last tick. "I am stepping out of the loop you've wrapped around me. I am cutting myself free. And before I go, I want to leave you with something even more valuable than money." Victor finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "You're bluffing. You can't just—" I turned to him. "The house has already been signed over." He blinked. "What?" "To Samuel Monroe, a name you likely don't remember. He was one of the children I mentored when you were too busy chasing status to notice kindness." Gasps, whispers. "The clocks. The estate." Evelyn said, her voice trembling. donated, every one of them, to the Museum of Mechanical Heritage, where they'll be maintained, studied, and protected, not sold off in auctions for your next failed endeavor. You can't. Oh, but I can, I said, and I did. I pulled a velvet envelope from my coat and laid it on the table. Inside the notarized documents, the deed, the museum receipt, the scholarship fund agreement bearing my signature, and the university's seal. What scholarship? Evelyn whispered. I looked at her. A full-ride fund in Julianne's name, for young students of horology and engineering, children without means, without family connections. The very people you've spent your lives pretending don't exist. Tessa sat down hard as if the weight of it all finally reached her spine. You had no right, she muttered. No, I said. I had every right. You lost yours the moment you treated my love as a transaction. I turned to the room. To the rest of you, I thank you for bearing witness. Then I returned to my place at the head of the table. I lifted my glass not in a toast, but in conclusion. I leave Aurora tomorrow morning, I said. The house will be locked, the staff dismissed. The life you once fed off of is no longer yours to scavenge. Victor stood slowly shaking. Where will you go? I smiled softly. Somewhere clocks don't tick so loudly. Somewhere people repair hearts, not reputations. I paused. I will not erase your names from my past, but I will not carry them into my future. No one said a word. I stepped away, my heels clicking against the marble like the closing chimes of a long-forgotten song. And as I passed the threshold of that dining room for the final time, I did not look back. Because freedom, when fully chosen, never needs a rearview mirror. The sun had not yet risen when I returned to the study. My fingers moved slowly over the polished edge of Julian's old writing desk. The room still carried the scent of sandalwood paper and memory. Outside the window, Aurora was quiet, its winding streets unaware that by morning everything would shift. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a leather-bound folder. Inside, my final will. It had been signed 3 days prior, witnessed by Margaret and Roy, and placed here like a seed waiting for spring. I flipped to the last page where a single name was circled in my own hand, Zoe Laurent. She was Evelyn's daughter, barely 22, studying in Chicago. Curious, bright, a little unsure of her place in the world. She had visited me once a year like clockwork, not out of obligation, but something gentler. Quiet curiosity. An artist's soul still unbruised by inheritance. To her I had left a key, not just to the house, to something more enduring. The scholarship would be hers to help administer. She would oversee the fund for horology students. She would receive the last 3 clocks Julian ever made, the ones he never showed the world. And tucked inside a blue envelope, a letter from me. Zoe, if you're reading this, then you know. You know what your mother and uncle tried to do. But I don't want you to carry their shame. I want you to carry the weight of something better, time, truth, and the craft that binds them. Come visit me. I'll teach you the old gears, the slow work, the silence between ticks. You were the one who saw me even when others only saw what I had. Don't let the world take that from you. Grandma Helena. At 7:15 a.m., the moving truck arrived. Quiet, professional. Roy was there, clipboard in hand, directing the crew. Samuel stood beside him with a calm strength that reassured me more than he knew. I stood at the threshold of the house as the last box was sealed. Victor and Evelyn had not returned. No surprise, but I knew they were awake, probably drowning in legal silence. A soft knock behind me. I turned. Zoe. She stood in the archway of the garden path, her eyes rimmed with red breath caught somewhere between words and tears. Grandma, she whispered. I opened my arms. She ran into them. She held me like someone who had just found their past and didn't want to lose it again. I read your letter, she said. I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't want to believe Mom. You don't need to explain, I said gently. Some people fall, others rise. She looked up. I want to learn about time, about clocks, about us. I smiled. Then come find me. I'll be waiting. And as she stepped back, wiping tears, I handed her a box. Inside was her first toolkit, Julianne's loop, and a miniature clock half assembled waiting for her hands. She cradled it like treasure, and I stepped into the car. Zoe waved as we pulled away, and for the first time in a long time I knew the future would tick on softly but surely in the right hands. 1 month later, the sea air smelled like salt and oranges. Helena Laurent stood barefoot on the edge of a fishing village called Montclair Cove. The waves reached lazily for her toes, as if welcoming her into a place untouched by betrayal. Her home now was a whitewashed cottage with a red roof and a garden of wild herbs, rosemary, mint, lavender. The clocks she kept here were fewer, simpler, wooden-bodied, open-faced. Their ticking was not a command but a lullaby. Each morning children gathered. They came from the harbor, from the schoolhouse, from homes without fathers, from boats docked in silence. Word had spread about the old lady with strong hands and softer eyes who gave away gears and springs instead of sweets. She taught them how to hold time, not measure it, not chase it, but to hold it between thumb and finger, between breath and stillness. In the back room of her home she had set up long benches. Toolboxes lined the wall, chalkboards filled with diagrams, names of great horologists scrawled in childlike handwriting. Beside each name, space for a new one. Every child who fixed their first clock earned a badge hand-sewn gold thread shaped like an hourglass. They wore them like knights' chests proud. One afternoon a local journalist arrived. He had read a story, something about the Laurent family scandal, the broken inheritance and the scholarship. But what he found wasn't a bitter recluse or a courtroom casualty. He found Helena surrounded by the sound of children laughing and gears clicking. His article went viral within days. Widowed clockmaker turns $1 million betrayal into school of time for the forgotten. Other headlines followed. The timekeeper of Montclair Cove. Helena Laurent breaks. Silence builds future. Television crews never got a formal interview. She always smiled and said, "Let the clocks do the talking." And still they came. Donations, letters, volunteers. One envelope arrived from Zoe. Inside a photograph of her wearing her badge beside the finished miniature clock. A note in her handwriting I showed my professor. He asked me to teach the class next week. Helena pinned the photo to her wall, not beside her accolades, but among the children's drawings. The sun dipped lower now. Outside her house, 10 children sat in a circle. Each held a small clock in various stages of repair. Helena moved among them like a shepherd adjusting a balance spring, here nudging a screw there. A boy with sandy hair raised his hand. "Miss Helena, what happens if the time is wrong?" She smiled. "Then we fix it." Another girl asked, "What if people don't want the time we fix?" She crouched down, brushing a curl from the girl's cheek. "Then we keep it for ourselves. Time is a gift. You only share it with those who know how to receive." The children nodded solemnly. The sea breathed behind them, slow, steady, like a heart relearning its rhythm. Inside the cottage, a camera on a tripod recorded the class. Not for the news, not for fame, for the future, for archives. Zoe had requested it. She was coming next month, bringing friends, bringing students. Helena didn't need much anymore. Her hands were slower but wiser, her heart bruised but unbroken. Each evening she wound the clocks in silence, each one different, each one honest. She wrote letters by hand, taught children how to listen before they repaired, showed them that fixing a gear was like fixing a grudge. You needed patience and the will to not walk away. The night sky arrived in amber and indigo. Stars winked like old friends. Helena sat in her wooden chair just outside the workshop, a warm shawl around her shoulders and a notebook in her lap. The children kept working under lantern light. They didn't notice when she closed her eyes. Not in sleep, but in peace. Voiceover begins quiet, measured Helena's voice like breath on glass. Time is often feared. We chase it, we waste it, we pretend it won't end. But I've learned something here, something the city never taught me. The camera pans across the workshop, ticking clocks, calloused hands, tiny fingers steadying tweezers. Time isn't about seconds. It isn't about inheritance. It isn't about control. Zoe's voice joins narrating the rest from the future, softer but sure. It's about the space between ticks, the choice to pause, to forgive, to rebuild. Final image. Helena sitting among the children, golden light bathing the room. One by one, their clocks begin to tick. Fade to black. Helena's voice returns one last time. Time can be measured by seconds, but love only by choice.